Hello and welcome. I am Gimba Umar. Tonight, court orders final forfeiture of assets allegedly linked to former head of service of the Federation, Winifred Oyoita. President Muhammadu Buhari departs New York after attending United Nations General Assembly sessions, where he participated in socio-economic discussions for Nigeria and Africa. Nigeria's education sector is under the spotlight tonight as we continue our series on Nigeria's independence anniversary. And US President Donald Trump is on the defense as lawyers acknowledge White House officials directed filing of Ukraine calls transcripts in highly classified systems.
On business news tonight, World Bank lists Nigeria among top 20 countries with improved reforms in the 2020 Ease of Doing Business ranking.
On sports news tonight, Nigeria's Super Falcons confirmed their status as Africa's #1.
And from Abuja, police rescues 300 children from illegal Islamic school in Kaduna State where they are being abused.
We begin tonight from the nation's capital, Abuja, where the Federal High Court today ordered the permanent forfeiture of some assets allegedly linked to the former head of service of the Federation, Mrs. Winifred Oyoita. Although details of the case were not read out in the open court, Justice Folashade Ogunbanjogiwa made the order of final forfeiture of the monetary assets to the federal government. Counsel to the EFCC, Muhammad Abubakar, says that the funds were voluntarily returned to the Commission as proceeds of crime by an associate of Mrs. Oyoita. He also reminded the court that it had on June the 28th, 2019, granted an ex parte application ordering the interim forfeiture of the assets. Mr. Abubakar explains that as at Thursday, August the 26th, no one had come out to challenge the interim court order on assets forfeiture, despite the fact that it had been served on the suspect. Mrs. Oyoita had been questioned by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the EFCC, over alleged fraud, which she denied. President Muhammadu Buhari had ordered her to proceed on indefinite leave to allow for proper investigation into the matter. And staying with legal matters, one of the lawyers representing the detained convener of the #RevolutionNow protest, Omoyele Sowore, is alleging that the Department of State Services, the DSS, had repeatedly blocked a bailiff of the Federal High Court in Abuja from serving a fresh court order for his release. In a telephone conversation, Mr. Sam Ogala says that the bailiff first arrived at DSS headquarters in Abuja around 9:30 a.m. today, but was asked to return by 12 noon when the Director General of the DSS, Yusuf Bichi, would be around. He explains that the bailiff returned to the DSS headquarters at 12:14 p.m. on Friday, but was denied access. Showore's legal team, led by Mr. Femi Falana-Osan, had on Thursday expressed shock over the DSS claims that it had not been served with the order issued by the Justice Taiwo granting bail to Mr. Showore. Mr. Falana said that Ayuba Adam of the legal department of the DSS had received the court order on behalf of the agency on Tuesday, September the 24th, 2019. And away from the courts now, President Muhammadu Buhari is on his way back to Nigeria after a series of meetings and engagements at the 74th Ordinary Session of the United Nations General Assembly. Some of the meetings had in attendance the President of the United Nations Assembly, Professor Tijjani Bande, presidents of other African countries and global business leaders as well. Our correspondent Ibrahim Adra now reports.
It has been a busy week for President Buhari and his delegation as they attend meetings at all levels, all of them targeting human development, especially on the African continent. Security, climate change, SDGs and illicit financial flows and poverty are some issues that engage delegations.
It is indeed an honor to join other strong voices to highlight the importance of multi-stakeholder engagement to achieve peace and security, poverty eradication.
This meeting is a peer review mechanism aimed at fighting poverty.
The budget has to expand. There has to be multi-sectoral dimension and effort to make sure that we lift people out of poverty, because poverty is a bit more permanent, and I think that's why the president started with setting up a ministry of humanitarian affairs, disaster relief, and social development that will, among other things, focus on some of these issues as well.
The president also held several bilateral meetings. Some members of the delegation held business interactions with potential direct benefit to states.
We had another side event which I attended in order to showcase Nasarawa, to attract investment, and so our investment focus in those areas that I have mentioned. We're looking for people who will come into the state, to invest in areas of education, because Nasarawa State is not where we wish to be, when it comes to education.
Ogun State being the biggest industrial hub in Nigeria, it's been an opportunity for me to meet a lot of potential investors who, how these people are. They want to see and meet with the chief executive in person. They want to have a feel of how and what you're thinking.
President Buhari's last assignment before departure is an audience with Nigerian Youth's Climate Group. He decries the challenging situation of population explosion with less rainfall and a shrinking Lake Chad. So between now and next year, when leaders will return here for another session of the General Assembly, it is hope they will put words to actions. From Manhattan, New York City, Ibrahim Adra, reporting for Channels Television News.
The Nigerian education sector is currently faced with several challenges which have over the years been generating concerns, particularly the rising number of out-of-school children. The United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, says that Nigeria has the highest rate of out-of-school children in the world, with 13.2 million on record. As we continue our special focus on Nigeria's independence anniversary, our next report examines the challenges of out-of-school children in the country.
59 years after independence, millions of Nigerian children are still roaming the streets instead of staying in their classrooms. A survey conducted by the United Nations Children's Fund indicates that the number of out-of-school children in Nigeria has risen from 10.5 million to 13.2 million. Most of these children are in Nigeria's northern states of Borno, Yobe and Adamawa, where the Boko Haram insurgency has disrupted academic activities. Although the federal government disputes the figure, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education insists that no nation can achieve economic prosperity without a sound, inclusive and functional educational system.
For us as an administration, our concerns have been twofold. First, to find an empirical means of getting our figures right and the best ways of reducing the number to the barest minimum. In the last 4 years, therefore, we have been making efforts to determine the exact number of out-of-school children.
Nevertheless, the government plans to prosecute parents who do not send their children to school.
The ministry call it not for the criminalization, because the idea has already been current even before us, but effecting it. And I think that at the time the governor also could also either give it effect or threaten to give it effect. And I think I agree with you that unless it is made a crime, until we start jailing parents who refuse to send their children to school, there are many who will still behind religion, behind culture, or behind so many other things. I agree with you, and I think it should be done, and it will be done.
Over the last 4 years, the government has invested about 350 billion naira into the basic education subsector. This is part of government's efforts to address the challenge.
I promise that we will try to bring the number of out-of-school children to about half. I must apologize, we have failed in that, but I believe we have put everything in place for the next minister to achieve this.
Beyond investments in the sector, it takes political will on the part of the government at the state level to drive the figures down.
Without education, our population would be a liability. With education, to our population will be an asset. And we want our population to be an asset. Therefore, we must provide education, affordable, accessible, and qualitative.
To me, I don't think there's anything to celebrate. 59 years, we still have over 10.7 million out-of-school children. You know, it calls for serious attention to the sector.
So, what solutions can be applied?
If I were to advise governors in the Northwest and the Northeast, which goal should they focus on? It's one, and it's a subset of one. Just educate the girl child.
It is all about coming up with, policies whereby these people will see the importance of education, especially to the girl child.
Although some level of improvement has been recorded over the years, progress towards achieving education for all appears to be under constant threat, as children associated with poverty, displacement, nomadism, disability, and terrorist attacks are still left behind.
We'll focus more on the education sector in the course of this bulletin. In the meantime, global inequality is the focus of discussion at the 2019 edition of the Goalkeepers event organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Manhattan, New York. The challenges and progress made so far in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals was also on the front burner as the world leaders, philanthropists and members of the civil society groups discuss this critical issue. Our correspondent Anne Waldo reports.
Though the journey towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals before 2030 has been a very challenging one, some countries and individuals have made progress. The challenges and progress are what world leaders, philanthropists, civil society groups, and young individuals have come together to discuss at the 2019 edition of the Goalkeepers organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The Prime Minister of New Zealand opens the session discussing the progress already made in her country.
In New Zealand, we've been having our Treasury developing what's called a living standards framework that measures well-being, it measures risk, it measures resilience across economic, social and environmental domains.
The theme this year is global inequality. But is equality enough to solve the world's problems?
We have to realize that we have bias in our relationships. We have bias even in how we treat our colleagues. It's in the spaces in between the generations where those customs and traditions are passed down. But we do know where the answers are going to come from. Having courage to look inward, to evaluate our own biases, and then to commit to making change.
Some individuals have also keyed into the achievement of the global goals in areas of agriculture, health, and technology. In Nigeria, over 2 million children suffer from severe acute malnutrition. The chairman of the Aliko Dangote Foundation is therefore determined to bridge that gap.
We're actually, we have what you call integrated nutrition program, of which now we're trying to, I'm sure Azora must have spoken about it. Right. We're now going to make sure that, yes, we access minimum, we take out 2 million children out of being malnourished. So it's one of the things that the foundation is doing. We're going to the government to make it mandatory for all the rice that we consume in Nigeria to be fortified. So this will help quite a lot.
Well, it's pretty important that we focus more on nutrition because about 40% of the kids who do survive end up not with physical or mental development. We're trying to make sure in every country that the typical diet that a child will have, whether it's rice or bouillon or flour, that across those staples, they get every single one of these micronutrients.
concludes this morning's program.
Addressing challenges of global inequality, that's the discussion at the 2019 edition of the Goalkeepers event. World leaders and everyone here believe that bridging the inequality gap in terms of gender, health, technology, and much more is necessary to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030 and creating an environment that treats everyone equally. From the Jazz Lincoln Center in New York, Ann Nwawadu, Channels Television News.
In part two, after the break, we'll continue our focus on the education sector with Mr. Busayo Morakinyo, an education consultant as well as a community engagement consultant at Connected Development Code. Plus, independent national electoral